Mr. Streeting, good to talk to you. Just a thought on what we saw in Nottingham yesterday morning and the loss of these two youngsters and a 51-year-old man. These kids, 19 years old, their whole lives ahead of them.
Good morning, Kate. First of all, my heart goes out to the family of those who've lost their lives. And, I know that we're still anxiously waiting news about other people who were injured in the course of what happened. It's an unspeakable, unthinkable tragedy. I cannot imagine what these families and their friends are going through. And I know for the people of Nottingham, students of Nottingham University, more broadly, I think people are really struggling to process and comprehend the news. So I think at this stage we've got to await the outcome of the police investigation to understand the motive of the attacker, see what news emerges. And of course, if anyone has any information about the person involved or the circumstances or witnessed anything, then they should contact the police. But it's a terribly, desperately sad time for the people of Nottingham, and I join Nottingham's Labour MPs in sending my heart out to everyone involved and support the police as they undertake what is undoubtedly an awful investigation for the officers to be involved in.
Yeah, indeed. So 3 other people treated in hospital, one of them in a critical condition after what happened. It makes us realise just how much we treasure our National Health Service. How are you going to save the NHS without injecting loads more cash?
Well, Kay, I know that investment is needed, and we've already made some specific commitments. The biggest expansion of NHS staff in history, £1.6 billion funded by abolishing the non-dom tax status. One of the arguments that I'm making today, I'm speaking to NHS leaders up here in Manchester. I'm speaking to you from Salford this morning. The argument I'm making is that even if the public finances weren't in a terrible mess, which thanks to the Conservatives they are, even if the NHS weren't in the biggest crisis in its history, which I think it objectively is, we would still need some change and modernisation in the NHS, partly because with an ageing population, the nature of disease and the sorts of conditions we're living with look very different now than they did in 1948. Also, more positively, we're sitting on top of a revolution that's taking place in medical technology, life sciences, AI, machine learning. And if we deploy the technology that already exists, let alone the stuff that's coming down the track, more effectively, we can deliver better outcomes for patients and also free up precious staff time. So, for example, if we used AI in the analysis of scans for breast cancer diagnosis, then we can free up about 30% of radiologist capacity and improve diagnosis and detection by about 16%. So better for patients, freeing up staff time and making sure we're using the money that's already going into the NHS to greatest effect. And in a time where, despite all the promises to axe the facts and purge the pager, we still see these devices being used. I think, talk to people who work in the NHS, it's a far cry from a modern National Health Service, and a Labour government would commit to working with the NHS.
Sure, we only have a finite amount of time, as you know, Mr. Streeting. So are you saying you wouldn't inject any more money into the NHS then?
I'm saying investment is needed, but reform is also necessary. And we're emphasising that. We'll set out our full plans at the next general election, Kay, but in a refrain that is going to become, hopefully already is familiar, but it's going to become more familiar. We are being very, very careful about the promises that we make in terms of spending. But I've got to tell you, every time I think things can't get worse with this economy with the Conservatives, they do. Inflation is not falling in the way that was expected and predicted. Interest rates are rising. Ask anyone like me who's renewed his mortgage this week what's going on there. The economy is not in a good state. And we've got to be hard-headed and realistic about what a Labour government might inherit. So we are thinking very carefully about our priorities.
What rate did you get?
Well, I'm lucky in that I renewed with my existing lender. So my rate came in at about, I think it was 4.33% in the end. But I'm paying hundreds of pounds more a month. Now, look, not asking your viewers to get out the world's smallest violin for me. I'm going to cope. But I am really worried about all of those families for whom that sort of increase is the difference between keeping your head above water or going under. I'm really worried about the state of the economy and the public finances.
As Shadow Health Secretary, I want to ask you about a story that really exercised our viewers yesterday. It's in a lot of the papers again today with think pieces about it. The woman that is spending 28 months in jail for her late abortion. She took pills, the 10-week pills, much later, which she got in the post during the pandemic. Should we decriminalise abortion?
This is an unspeakably awful place, first of all, let me say, Kay, and I'm horrified that such a late-stage termination took place. I'm horrified at what we've already learned about the circumstances in which this occurred. And also, I don't mind saying, I'm horrified at the idea of a mother of 3 children being put behind bars. You know, my mum was born in prison. I know the impact of having parents, in my case, grandparents in the criminal justice system, the impact that has on families. I've got to be careful what I say because I think there's going to be an appeal in this case. I don't think we should rush to judge.
Mr. Streeting,
Yeah,
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you whether Labour thinks we should decriminalise abortion. Lucy Powell, your colleague, was here yesterday. She says it certainly needs to be looked into. What do you think? You're the Shadow Health Secretary.
Well, we don't have any sentencing guidelines at the moment, and thankfully that's because these cases are exceptionally rare. I think in terms of a difficult and sensitive issue such as this, I think probably the best thing to do at this stage is let the appeal run through, see what the outcome of the judicial process is in this case, and then take a bit of a step back and look in the broadest sense at where the law is, how it's applied, and crucially, because this is how I approach it as the person who wants to be our country's health secretary, I want to make sure, as someone who believes very strongly in a woman's right to choose, that every woman is able to exercise that right in a timely way, in a safe way, and in a legal way, so that no woman is ever in a situation where she would even contemplate breaking the law. The abortion time limit.
Question a third time. I must ask you a third time. Do you think that abortion should be decriminalised here in England?
Well, as I say, Kay, I do think that we've got to look in the broadest sense at how the law is constructed. I think we should do that after this case concludes and not through the prism of this case. I'm not comfortable with the idea of criminalising women. Abortion is a conscience issue. It's for every member of parliament to make their decision. I'm not comfortable with the situation as it is. But as we have seen with this case and with, I think the last case was 10 years ago, even worse, I would argue, than this one. We've got to be this is a really difficult and sensitive area, and one that I don't mind admitting. You know, we're not, as politicians, we're not supposed to admit vulnerability or uncertainty. We're supposed to be definitive and sure on everything. I don't mind admitting, as someone who's very, very strongly supports a woman's right to choose, that this case and ones like it, thankfully rare, raise really, really difficult ethical issues that I think we should look at and consider in a thoughtful, compassionate, and considered way. But I don't pretend to have all of the answers this morning.
OK, just before I let you go, I want to ask you about one of the select committees that is meeting today to hear from the head of ITV. And they'll be talking about what happened with Philip Schofield and the greater culture within ITV. And the chair of that committee, Caroline Dinenage, was on the programme last week. And she was saying to me that, you know, I paraphrase her, she was saying that some television presenters can be seen and treated as TV gods. Do you think that TV presenters are too big for their boots?
Well, I'll tell you what, there are lots of answers I could give. I'm not sure if I'm brave enough. I worship at the altar of Kay Burley. She's a brilliant presenter. I'm glad I'm at this end and not within arm's reach of you this morning, Kay.
Yeah, unfortunately, you'd be a party of one there. But it's always good to see you, Wes. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Kate.